the beast, we've cornered him. Draw your weapons. Prepare yourselves. Charge!
Welcome to the Raiders Confessional, the podcast for all things raiding in the world of Warcraft.
How's it going, Raiders? My name is Ryan, and this is TRC Episode 12. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, welcome. If you are coming here for whatever reason, I will tell you right now that today's show is going to be the second part of a two-part series where we are talking stats, sims, and gear selection with the folks over at the AskMrRobot crew. So I would advise you at this point in time to go ahead and pause the show right here and head on over to the previous episode, which would be episode 11, and start there, and then rejoin us once you've done that. For those of you who listened to last episode, or any other episode for that matter, welcome back. As usual, joining me today are my co-hosts Dan and Cole. Dan is back with us. Dan and Cole, how are you guys?
Good.
Hello.
Surviving a hurricane.
Yeah. So Cole is surviving a hurricane right now.
He's in a boat.
So it'll be a boat soon.
Now that you've mentioned that, I feel it prudent to mention, if Cole does drop out of the call or there's any sort of weird things going on with the show, just know that we apologize ahead of time. We are trying to do the best we can, but there is the possibility that Cole may go surfing for a little bit and might not be on the podcast at some point in time. So, Dan, since you are rejoining us and you were not present in last week's episode, we're going to let you kind of go ahead and first. What have you been up to lately in game?
In game, in life, everything. I came back from the dead. I'll apologize to the AMR crew as well as our listeners for missing last week's episode. I had just gotten back from my bachelor party in Atlantic City, and I more or less didn't know what day it was. So it was a very successful trip. But other than that, now that you finally decided that you are going to play Hunter, I can gear my DK for tanking. So that's more or less what I've been doing lately. We finally got Avatar or KJ last night. I can't complain about that. Yeah, that's about it.
Cool, man. Cole, I know right now you've got your raincoat on sitting inside and your umbrella open, which is bad luck. But other than that, what have you been up to in game?
Just gearing my rogue and messing around with that. Now I'm simming him constantly. Finally got some gear on him. So yeah, that kind of been using AMR to sim him and getting pretty good results. So I'm excited to talk about what we're talking about today.
Sure. And I gotta ask you this next question because I've got you on record right now, so I can hold you to it more so than I can if I just get an answer from you in game. Which character are you leaning towards for Argus?
I still think my Demon Hunter, because I can't get legendaries on the rogue. So if I don't get any legendaries coming up here soon, or if I get a really bad one, I'm just going to be like, all right, I'm done leveling alts. I'm just sticking on this guy. So
Ryan, have you got the soundboard for the small violin?
I know, right? Cue the crickets. Cue the crickets and the violin.
Freaking Legos.
And a big
I've been playing bootleg tunes with bad Legos this whole expansion, so I don't even want to hear it.
Yeah, but you're a tank. You just sit there, hit buttons. Oh wait, we all do that.
Yeah, I hit them with my face, and sometimes it works out okay, But we have a very long show ahead of us, and we definitely need to keep things moving forward. So without further ado, I'd like to reintroduce one person, but also, well, I guess 1.5 persons, because one of the three joining us today decided to hijack last episode's call for a little bit, but it was a welcomed hijack. But I would like to introduce the three people from over at AskMrRobot: Zoop, Yellow, and Swol. How are you guys?
Doing great.
Good. Doing great.
Cool. Well, I know all three of us, we yapped for damn near half an hour, almost 45 minutes before we hit the record button today. And inevitably Cole started nerding out and geeking out, and then Dan jumped in, and the conversation went down a rabbit hole from there. But I think that bodes well for today's episode. I think we have a lot of really good things to talk about, and hopefully we can manage to squeeze enough in to have a successful show. But to kind of rehash, before I let these two newcomers kind of introduce themselves, to kind of rehash the whole purpose of this episode, we often at times, if you guys will go over to a class Discord and you find that you are received with unwelcome pushback for asking questions, or searching for resources, or even just a point where you might not necessarily understand something that you're being told, and you're not finding the answers you need to better understand that is the goal of this episode. We want to break down the barriers between the players, and the people who are in charge of running simulators, theory crafting, people who are making ranked lists for gear selection, all of those things that go into kind of preparing and making the best decisions possible for getting your tune ready for raids. And so I think we have a lot of really good stuff coming up, and I'm really excited to get into it. Before I do that, I would like to I guess we'll kind of start with you, Yellow. You jumped in on the call last time. And so I kind of like maybe take a moment, just kind of introduce yourself. What's your history with the game? What's your role over at AMR? And kind of a brief history with that whole stuff.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us here too. I've been a raider since vanilla, mainly as a tank. I've done warrior, druid, non-planet paladin. I was going to do a DK, but then I decided warriors were cooler and did that a second time. I do all the engineering at Team Robot, so I wrote the simulator, wrote the gear optimizer, wrote the statistical model that glues them together. I do all the day-to-day engineering too, keeping the servers up and all that kind of stuff. So that's my thing. It keeps me busy all day.
Yeah.
And how long have you been playing the game? Since day one, or?
Not quite day one, but in vanilla, we started our own raiding guild. It was the first MMO I'd played, so I kind of didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that the first raid team I joined knew even less what they were doing. And so me and Zoop and Swol started our own guild kind of right before Blackwing Lair came out, I think, is when we got going.
Sure.
He sounds like me.
Now, are you guys still running that same guild, or no?
It's not the same guild, but it's a continuation for the most part. We still have some of those people that we raided with in Molten Core raiding with us.
Yeah.
We're a much smaller group now. We all are older and busier, but we still get our 2 raids in a week, so it's going strong.
That's cool. I always like hearing people that are still sticking to it, as Cole and I have experienced, and I'm sure Dan has too, as we get older, a lot of the people playing the game are in their early 20s, and a lot of us are in 30s and above, and a lot of the people we started out with and built friendships with have slowly started dropping like flies, and it's a lot of new faces, a lot of some old faces, but it's always nice to hear people who have stuck with it and are still around. So again, short press for time here. I'd like to kind of move on over to Swol. Swol, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and tell us your history with game and AMR?
Sure. Yeah, thanks also for having me on the show. Apologize in advance. Yellow and I are identical twins, and we sound almost exactly alike. So you probably won't know which one of us is talking. Same thing. I've been raiding with Yellow and Zoop got me into World of Warcraft. They started playing a few months before I did. They got me into it. And I've been playing ever since. I played mostly healers, but then I switched. But I've sort of, I'm kind of one of those people, I can't stick with one character for a whole expansion. So I've usually got a damage character and a healer, and I switch off depending on what the raid needs. And at AskMrRobot, I do all of the user interface work, the front end of the website, and I do all of the theory craft for the most part. Yellow does more of the tanks, but all the damage, all the healing, the entire simulator implementation, all the rotations, all that stuff. That's what I do.
That's cool. And I, before we kind of jump into things here, I got to ask, now that we've got the whole family, present, who of the three of you had the idea to start AMR?
I think that would be Yellow and the Silverlight competition.
Yeah. So you guys remember an old crappy web technology called Silverlight that's now defunct? It was like a Flash replacement.
I do. Yeah, I hated installing that thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I liked it and I hated it. But they had a competition way back when to make the best Silverlight application, and I was learning it for a job that I was working at the time, some contract or another. And I said, well, this contract sucks, but maybe on the side I could try to win this contest. Like, you know what we should make? We should make a WoW gear optimizer. And well, it was actually a simulator. We made a Death Knight simulator in Silverlight that ran in your browser. And it was awesome, and we didn't win the competition, but it kind of gave us the idea. The simulator was really cool, and then it gave us the idea, well, hey, the simulator was cool, but I think what people really want is a gear optimizer. And so I told these guys, we sat down one day and thought about it, and we're like, yeah, let's do this.
That's pretty cool. I kind of just curiosity, killed the cat type thing. Wanted to know who
I don't even want to say what I was installing Silverlight 5 for or whatever it is now.
Hey, Netflix used to use it. That's all. So
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, we're getting old.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of, I guess we'll quit pussyfooting around and just kind of jump right into this. And I'd like to take a moment to kind of rehash what we spoke about last week, just to kind of refamiliarize everybody who might be, coming to us with having listened to the last episode upon release, and there's been a bit of time to easily forget some of the things. But I'll kind of let Zoop, why don't you, I guess, give us a brief synopsis of kind of the stuff. We talked stats, sims, and kind of the basics of gear selection last week. Just kind of give a brief synopsis, like I said, of what we talked about last week.
Yeah, so last week we were kind of setting the stage. Like, you have to know the basics before you can understand, how gear gets ranked. And so we talked a lot about, what simulators do. They're basically, they mimic the game, and they do it over a whole lot of iterations. And iteration is defined as like if you do a boss fight, that's one fight. And so you might do 1,000 iterations to reach a 0.25% margin of error and all these different things. So you do this over and over and over again, to figure out what DPS would be, what talents you should maybe select, all these different what if scenarios. A simulator is great for that. And then we talked about how the simulators are used to create stat weights, and what stat weights really are. And so, back in the day, stat weights came about as a clever way to rank gear. If every point of crit gave you 10 DPS, your stat weight for crit would be 10. And then you can just do simple multiplication on all the different stats in your gear and find out their value, and that's how you know which one is better. And if it has a gem slot that you can put a gem with 100 crit on it, you know how much more DPS that adds. And then we covered the things that don't work with stat weights, which we're finding out is a lot of things now with these latest expansions. Stat weights can't handle procs. So you have a trinket proc, your legendary procs, your set bonus procs. A stat weight can't do that because those aren't stats. And so we talked about how, just a little bit, setting the stage for this episode, about how we handle it at AskMrRobot, and basically, how we've addressed the shortcomings of stat weights and why our system ends up working a little bit better. And I think that covers it, right?
Yeah,
that was the super fast recap.
The quick read. And so I would definitely say again, if any of you guys who are returning listeners or new listeners just heard what she said and some of it doesn't quite make sense, I would highly advise to, again, pause here and go back and listen to the previous episode, and then rejoin the episode after you've done that, because we go into a little bit more detail and explain some of these things and try and give a better understanding, because I think it is imperative to, when looking to kind of gain a handle on this stuff so that you can best interpret when you go use these systems, whether it be a SimC or the AMR stuff, which, we are trying to on some level advocate for AMR, because when I first heard you over at the Training Dummies and since speaking to you guys since then, I really, really like what you guys going on. You guys do a lot of things differently than other programs or theory crafters or guides don't do, which we'll dive deeper in later. But yeah, so I would, again, like I said, pause here, go re-listen to that and come back, because our whole goal at the end of the show is to help you guys have a better understanding. So when you're in game, you can make better decisions, and not be succumbed to some things that may not necessarily be right when looking at other class guides or using other systems that are currently out there. So I kind of like to jump straight into it from here, Zoop, and I'll let you take the reins. But one of the big caveats we spoke to about last week, and you just touched on with stat weights, is when making gear decisions, whether it be, a fresh character who just hit 110 and you're trying to gear straight up for raids, or you've been raiding for a long time and upgrades are much more minor than they used to be, you still want to make the best decision possible. So that requires at some level a metric or a measurement rather to help you make those decisions. And there's a few things in game that make that hard because, again, like you said, stat weights don't necessarily always apply to things like legendaries or trinkets. And so I'd like to kind of start with that, and then let you take it from there. I guess we'll start with legendaries. Why, what about legendaries makes it hard, and how do we address legendaries?
Right. And that's an interesting place to start too, because I think that's one of the biggest questions people have when they're trying to rank gear is, what are my best legendaries? And so we kind of have to separate that a little bit. There's one thing to say, here's what the best legendaries are if you have perfect gear. And that's kind of like what a best in slot list might look like. That's what the ranked legendary lists you see are taking into account, like one type of character with one set of talents, and here's your best. And then the other thing is, what's best for me right now. And so when you're looking at this, based on all the data we have, because we pour over this every hour of every day, we found that half the value of a legendary comes from the stats on it, right? Because they're just high item levels. And then the other half of the value comes from the proc. And, procs will range anywhere from about 2 to 5% DPS. And so it's just something interesting to know. When you compare it to an increase in item level, about 20 to 30 item levels will be a similar increase to the proc of a legendary. So if your legendary is going, a 970 legendary is replacing, a 900 item versus a 940 item, well, that 940 item is already getting you a pretty big jump in DPS, right? It's getting you a 2 to 5% jump in DPS just from that one item. So anyway, there's a lot of things to look at. So you start asking yourself, well, what ends up being best? Do I replace this Titan Forged item with an okay legendary? With my best legendary? What happens if I have an item from last tier? Does that affect which legendary is better, right? Because it's all about what slot you're replacing it in. What if my best legendary, let's say I have the 2 best legendaries that I've seen from these ranked lists, but what if equipping one of those disables my 4-piece set bonus? You're going to be like, well, is that worth it? I don't know. And I think that's why so many people, you see all these people asking, I don't know what to equip, right? And I think a lot of people feel lost, and I don't want anyone to ever think, I just don't know how to gear. I'm not smart enough to figure this out. No, it's a very confusing problem. It is not you. And so, you're going to be, trying to figure this out. And a lot of times if you, ask people, you'll get told to sim it. And you're like, okay.
I hate that.
Right?
Sim it. Just sim it.
Now,
Sim
what
it.
would you sim? If you were told to sim it, what are you going to sim?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know, because
Right.
I'm just gonna go push the button, right?
Well, what if I don't have the gear that I want to test with, or if I get like a 860 or an 865 or an 870 of that same piece, like all those matter, right?
Right, totally. And so one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this until I actually did the math on it, is let's say you have all 8 let's say you have 8 legendaries, and let's say you have 6 set items, and you're just like, I just want to see the best combo of these, right? To make my 4-piece and the 2 best legendaries. And that's all I care about. I'm not even going to change my other items. That alone, just those 8 legendaries and 6 items, is 450 combinations of gear. So now you'd have to sim 450 combos of gear to find the best set if you wanted to sim it.
I would have to press that button that many times, just simulate over and over.
On our website, you can set up like a batch run. So what you'd do is you'd go and check a box for your 8 legendaries and check a box for 6 items and press the button once.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And
That's
each setup will take about a second to run. So that would take 450 seconds to run. And you should never do bath in public, but I'm going to say that's about 9 minutes. Is that right? Yeah, we're going to pretend that's 9 minutes.
Yeah,
Everyone's going to follow along. Great. So you have to wait 9 minutes for that. That's not too bad, right? 8 minutes, 8 times 9, 8 minutes. We're going to go with 8 minutes. Great. You're right. 9 times. It's cool. That's why you never do math in public. Now,
it's the best.
right. Now, let's say you also have 5 trinkets in your bags. And you're like, well, I know some of this interacts, so I really should be doing my legendaries, my set items, and my trinkets. That just increased your number of combinations to 4,500. So now, let's also say you have 1 alternate relic, just 1. And you're like, well, maybe this relic is better than that relic. I'm not sure. So we're going to add that in too. And that's 9,000 combinations. Now, if each one of those takes a second, now that's 9,000 seconds. And I definitely cannot do that math in my head. What does that come out to be for time?
Couple hours.
9,000 divided by 60 minutes. 2.5 hours. Thank you. Yep. So now you're going to wait 2.5 hours for that. But as you just said, you're like, well, what if I have a Titan Forged item? Well, that's not considering any other items you own. So if you start adding in some of that stuff, well, now it just gets out of control, right? You're going to be waiting 2.5 days for your results. So when people say sim it, I feel like what a lot of people are picturing is that you put on your 2 favorite legendaries, sim it, you take those 2 off and put on 2 other ones that you're questioning, sim it, and call it a day. But that's not accounting for all the other options that could end up making one of those legendaries look better, including the stats. So you can see how this gets very, very complicated very, very quickly. And you can see how one set of stat weights isn't going to work because let's say, your really awesome legendary chest performs best with high crit and, your next best legendary performs really well with a lot of haste. Well, to give each one the best light, like to see it in its best setting, you're going to have to run a set of gear with high haste and a set of gear of high crit, and now you're going to have to compare those. And so one set of stat weights isn't going to work with that.
So to kind of give an example of I think what you're talking about, you and I encountered this when looking at my affliction lock. When I go look at a guide and when I go look at a ranked list of gear, every time you go to a class Discord and you look at their guide, it's going to tell you want to wear the shoulders, the gloves, the pants, and the helm for the 4-piece, right? Because that's also pertaining, you're wearing the 2 best in slot legendaries. That those guides are pertaining to having every single piece necessary for that to be the best option out there.
Right.
But so, when I looked at that ranking list for legendaries, I was wearing the 2 legendaries that were ranked the highest on that list. But when I ran it in your system, it was telling me to take off the chest and put on the cloak, because the cloak,
which you said
to
nobody
me,
recommends the cloak.
Right, and it's one of the lowest on the list. But again, that was what happened there was the chest piece I had behind that legendary chest piece was a 940 tier piece. Mm-hmm. So the stat value difference on the chest pieces versus the stat value difference on the cloaks was high enough that it made that cloak better for me based on the gear I had. So yes, while in theory it is absolutely great and fantastic to gear towards these guides, because they might actually be like, if you can possibly obtain every single one of those individually suggested pieces for that set, yeah, you're probably going to be top parses if you can do your rotation right. But that's hardly ever the case unless you're a Mythic World First Raider. So if you want to do the best possible output that you can do with what you have at that given time, this is another one of those points that I would like to rehash later in the show when we get BitMade Freeform. But that's a really good example. I feel like a real life example of what you're talking about, so people can have a better understanding, I think.
No, absolutely. And yeah, that one was interesting. And because you have that 940, if you didn't have that 940 chest and you had an 890, the legendary chest probably would be best, right?
Right.
It's all because you have that nice Titan forged item that you don't fit the mold, which is, covers 99% of players.
And I can say, when I went and tested it, everything in all the other class guides I could find said don't do this. And when I ran the sims, both in the AMR simulators and the SimC, even the SimC stuff kind of suggested towards the guides. But when I went in game and did my normal thing, the set of gear I was using from the AMR suggestion with using the cloak, the legendary cloak instead of the legendary chest, was giving me higher damage outputs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's just helpful for people to be able to see things they normally wouldn't consider, which is what a computer is going to do, right? It's going to get past our biases because we all read these guides, and it's hard, socially, right? If people know you have this other legendary and you're not wearing it, they might harass you a little bit, be like, "Lol, you don't know what to wear." But it's like, well, no, it just so happens that with my 1.2 billion combinations of gear, it turns out this cloak is actually the better legendary, until you get other items. Like once you get other items, it's probably going to tend towards that legendary chest. If you get if you get a 940 Titan forged cloak instead, well, now your legendary chest is probably going to end up being better.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we've kind of addressed legendaries, I know trinkets kind of fall into the same category too. And so kind of along with talking about trinkets, I feel like we probably covered most of what would be said for trinkets with legendaries. I also want to kind of talk about, a lot of times in the past when I've gotten a new item and that item has fit one of those guide lists, I've vendored or deleted another item that I was previously wearing. But in reality, if I were to use the system and find the best possible output with what I currently had, it may not have been prudent for me to get rid of that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I'd kind of like to address that maybe more so with the trinket stuff and go from there.
Yeah, I would say just because there's so many different combinations of things, something might have high crit or high haste and things can shift. Trinkets and legendaries can have interactions with each other, with talents, like all sorts of stuff. I'd err on the side of keeping things unless you're pretty sure you're never going to use it. Like if you got a really good Titan forged item that has the same stats as another item that isn't Titan forged, they both have crit and haste. You're like, okay, all right, they're close enough that I probably will never put on this one that's 30 item levels lower. But definitely with like trinkets and procs and stuff. And I like to hang on to those just because I might switch them out for different fights. Or depending on what other people are on the team, or healers are on the team, like that might change my style a little bit. And yeah, so I would do that. Now, when it comes to how our site handles these things, so in the past, everyone used stat weights. The stat weights were king. But now we've moved beyond that. And so we basically simulate all of the, well, I should actually have Yellow explain this if you're ready to talk about the adaptive strategies we have. Or did you want to get more into the trinkets?
Let's talk trinkets real quick, and then I'd also like to, and then maybe move over to Swol and talk about the rotation stuff, and then we'll let Yellow speak about the specifics of what you're talking about currently.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of questions do you have about the trinkets? Do you have an example?
Well,
let's talk Infernal Cinders, really.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's
probably
a good
the
one.
most complicated one.
Sure. Yellow, do you want to talk about that one?
Sure. Infernal Cinders is what we like to call a snowflake item, and Blizzard likes to add a few of these snowflake items just to piss off anyone trying to rank gear every now and again. The way we rank the item is we assume that nobody else in your raid has the Infernal Cinders. So it's sort of a worst case estimate. It's you have no idea what any particular player's situation is going to be, so we kind of go with we just assume you're going to be with really unlucky people and not be running with a guild that forces their tank to wear it to buff everybody, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's those sort of items are definitely tricky. What we ended up doing is we added a setting in our simulator so that you could simulate it with as many people as you want having it. And then we give you the tools that you need. If you wanted to, you could make a custom strategy with that setting turned on, and then it would rank it under those conditions. Or you could just run a couple of spot simulations to estimate for yourself what's the difference between nobody having it and 4 people having it for my current gear. And you can see in the simulation results, it's about, 10,000 DPS difference or whatever it ends up being. And then you can sort of estimate that. You could look and say, well, 10,000 DPS is whatever 1% of my damage. So then you can look at your gear ranking result and say, well, I know 3 of my buddies have this thing, so I can get another 1% out of this. And then you can sort of eyeball that with the best in bags results that we give you, or best in slot. If best in slot says putting on a different trinket will increase your DPS by 0.5%. Well, I should probably just leave Infernal Cinders on.
Yeah. Well, and actually that kind of leads me into another question still regarding trinkets, but so a trinket like Spectre off of KJ, does your simulator, I guess when you write your boss code, does it take into account that the boss will move for certain mechanics? So for like a trinket like Spectre, where you want the boss to stay in one spot so you can use it over and over again, does that change the value of that trinket by moving the boss?
Yeah, for that particular trinket, we do have movement in our boss scripts. Like we assume that sometimes you have to move out of the way and sometimes not. But we are a little optimistic with Spectre. We assume that you can get the maximum value out of the Spectre.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of one of those perfect situation trinkets anyway.
Right. And it's a little tough to get perfect use out of it, but also I think it's also too pessimistic to assume you'll never get the double hits out of each Spectre. So it should be a pretty good estimate. With a little bit of cleverness, you can usually get the extra hit.
Yeah, that's another, I feel like another snowflake kind of trinket that they threw out there.
Well, it's interesting, and I think there's other multiple examples too, because you also have, trinkets that, stand still, whatever. There's all sorts of little caveats out there right now. But I just kind of wanted to take a quick second to
trinkets are rough. Those are probably the hardest.
And then if you take that same thing over to legendaries, certain legendaries, well, yes, in theory, they might be the best if you possess the skill sets necessary to maximize their potential. But certain legendaries can require a higher set of skill than others, so the margin of error is different there.
Well, and I feel like with legendaries, it's always assumed that you're farming content. So they always try to pick, like the community tries to pick the best DPS ones, when really, do they know that this person is on farm content, or are they trying to kill KJ for the first time? So like Pridez is now the number 1 trinket, or not trinket, neck piece or whatever. So I feel like legendaries are way complicated. Yeah,
there's those ancillary benefits to a lot of the legendaries that you can't really put a number on for a DPS spec. The damage shield on Pridez, I see a lot of people using, even in our own guild. Like, I'm sick of dying, I'm putting on my Pridez.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
The other interesting thing about trinket ranking that we account for in our gear optimizer is, I'm sure you guys have noticed, a lot of these on-use trinkets lock each other out. You use one trinket and then you can't use another trinket for 10, 20 seconds. It's dependent on the trinket. That's
true.
Yeah, it's a huge pain. I mean, a sort of worst case example, I know Retribution Paladins back, when we didn't have all the raid trinkets available, Horn of Valor was really big because the buff duration is the same duration as Crusade, roughly. And then there was another trinket. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's just blanked out on it. It was another unused trinket with a roughly
faulty countermeasures.
Faulty countermeasures. That's the one. It's got like a 20-second buff or 30-second-ish buff that overlaps really well with Crusade. And both of them, if you looked at the trinket rankings floating around the internet, were way at the top. Like, these are awesome trinkets. You got to have them. But if you use them both together, it kind of sucks. You can't use them both during Crusade because they lock each other out.
Oh, wow.
And so I wrote a bunch of logic into our simulator that can examine the lockout of use trinkets and optimally align them with your powerful cooldowns like Crusade. And it was able to get a lot more value out of double on use setups than a lot of people assumed. And then it was also able to value the loss that you're going to get from using double on use trinkets that a lot of people weren't accounting for. That's not a very good combo, faulty countermeasures and Horn of Valor. You're just going to lose too much value from one trinket or the other. So even other trinkets that seem bad or rank low in the community are going to end up being way better choices for you. And our gear optimizer will account for that interaction. We put in a whole bunch of silly extra modifications to the score if you wear particular pairs of trinkets.
Well, and so, like, I guess to kind of expand upon this, I have another situation like on my lock. You guys are going to have to remind me of the names here, but what is the trinket that gives crit at the end of its duration off of KJ?
The Tome of Unraveling.
Yes.
Yes. Sanity, is that it?
Yeah, the Tome of Unraveling. We'll just go with Tome of Unraveling. And then also the owl, the Spectre Owl, or whatever, off of Sisters.
Tarnished Sentinel Medallion.
There he goes. Tarnished Sentinel Medallion. I have both of those, and when I look at priority list in terms of which trinkets you want to go after, those two are really, really high for a lot of classes. But I'm speaking in the respect of a Destro lock. But a lot of times when you're in a fight and you're pairing up cooldowns, whether it's heroism, pots, that kind of thing, if you were to go purely off of the suggested priority system of it would always say use the Tarnished Sentinel Medallion before using the Tome of Unraveling. But based on the fact that Tome of Unraveling gives a ton of crit at the end of its duration, it's actually better for me if opportunities present itself to use the Tome of Unraveling first and then pop Soul Harvest, Pot, and Tarnished Sentinel Medallion at the end of Tome of Unraveling, because I can benefit from the crit, which goes against all of the guides. And so there's always situations that come up that make things different. And that's, again, going back to what I said at the beginning of the show, that's the whole point of this. We're trying to break down some of the barriers that players, or I guess the old habits type thing, where people just are so ingrained and habitual in their way of thinking about things that, there's so many more variables at play now than there ever was back in BC or Wrath or even, vanilla, that changes how things necessarily work. I
kind of want to see your sims on that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I also got a question regarding tanks with the trinkets. Does your simulator account for what at least the Discords are saying with it being half capacity for DPS trinkets and everything? Has your simulator said otherwise with it? I'm curious on that.
Do you mean the adjustments the game builds in for, it cuts the damage amount for tanks and proc rates and stuff? Yeah, as far as I know, I have all those kind of adjustments modeled in the simulator. If I've missed one, let me know, because sometimes they're hard to find in the spell data.
I was just not sure if you guys actually accounted for it or if it was still in testing of if that was completely true or not.
Yeah, there's a couple of trinkets I just recently tested. One was Spectre. It does do half damage for tank specs. And it also does 70% of normal damage for unholy DKs. So does Vial of Ceaseless Toxins, one of the other ones with the Shadow proc, or a Shadow damage effect. Then I also found that Infernal Cinders does 70% of normal damage for Enhancement Shamans.
Whoa.
Because they get both of those specs have a mastery that would multiply the effect on those trinkets. And because of that, the game lowers the base value of both those trinkets so that it comes back up to about the same power level as, the other specs.
Do they still benefit from other people having the trinket at the same? Okay. And they still give the same to other people? I guess it would be 100%.
Right. So if the tooltip says it does, I don't remember, like 60,000 damage per proc, it just does. Well, the game's tooltip includes a lot of the multipliers, but in the spell data, if it says it gives a base 50,000 damage, it's just 70% of that for enhancement shamans.
Okay, interesting.
And that was kind of interesting because, I don't know, maybe it's in the spell data somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So somebody reported it, and I just tested it on a target dummy.
Oh, so you have to do a lot of these testing in game?
Yeah.
Stuff that can't be found in the spell data, yeah, we end up just having to go in game and try it out for ourselves.
That's cool. Yeah, I guess I never thought that you guys would do that, but yeah, it makes sense.
Oh, I do a ton of in-game testing.
Learning a bunch. Yeah.
Well, I think now that you've finally, come out of your slumber and chimed in here, Swol, I think this is the perfect opportunity to move into one of the things we wanted to speak to you about, and that is kind of how you design rotations.
Sure. I design rotations by... Well, first off, I implement every single spell in the game in the simulator. So, like we just said, a lot of times I'm going in the game and I'm testing the damage for every spell and making sure that it's doing the right damage. I have a formula that I think it should match, and so I test it out. And so I play every spec a little bit. I raid with, three different classes, and I have raided with a lot of them. And so when I go to start a rotation for a spec, I already know what all the spells do, and I have a good idea in my head of basically what you're trying to do. And so I write a simple rotation, and then I can make a good guess at some optimizations that need to be done. And I really try to make a really good effort at making a good rotation without looking at any other sources to start. Because if I just looked at other sources first, we would all just kind of end up doing the same thing. And, maybe there's another good way to do it. So I start from there, and I see how the damage is, and then I start to compare my results to what other theory crafters are doing. Like, other theory crafters will make rotations for SimC, and so maybe I'll compare the two and see which one's doing more or less for different talent builds, and I'll get some ideas from that. Lots of times users on our website will come offer suggestions on how to play specs. Some are nicer than others about it, but either way, I know how to make the simulator do what we want. So someone will say, I want to align symbols of death and death from above every single time, even if you have to delay death from above. I'm like, okay, I know how to make the simulator do that, and I test it and see if it does more damage. And then, once the expansion has gone on a little bit, I'll start to look at combat logs of the top players and look at what they're doing. And then you can get some really good ideas for tweaks because, people are clever. Top players are very clever, and they come up with some great ideas. And so I use, once a content tier has been out for 3, 4, 5 weeks, then I usually turn more to logs than anything for creating the rotations. Where they got their ideas from, who knows? But that's generally where I look. And then the other thing when I'm designing a rotation is I don't just test it against best in slot gear. I test it against all sorts of different gear. Bad legendaries, set items, no set items, bad stats, good stats. Because I feel like a lot of rotations that are developed for on other sites really just focus on mythic raiders who have tons and tons of gear and farm all the time. And they kind of don't care about people who have bad gear. So
yeah, that's true.
I find that lots of times there's changes to the rotation which will make suboptimal gear a little less suboptimal. And so I try to put a lot of focus on that, because the point of my rotations is to rank all the gear in the game. So I need to give all the gear in the game a fair shake. So I don't focus on one talent build, one step bonus, or anything like that. I try to make the rotation work for everything.
Which is that's good, because I feel like 95% of the player base is probably in that boat where they don't have the best Titan Forge gear or whatever.
Right, and then some people just don't like playing with certain talents. I use Sub Rogue as an example because I've been playing it. Yeah, Death from Above does a lot of damage, top damage, but I don't really like it, so I don't use it. I use Mark for Death. And so I want a rotation that's optimized for Mark for Death also. I try to make sure that, because you'll do 3% less damage, but for my raid team, that doesn't matter. I'm still, you could still get a 90% parse using a talent build that does 3% less damage, easy.
Yeah, and Death from Above is kind of clunky, right? In positioning and everything like that when you use it. It's a hard ability. It's
a little better now, The wonky thing about it is you can use Shadow Dance on your way down, and you basically get an extra ability in your Shadow Dance. We don't know if it's a bug or not, or by design, but that's why you get so much more damage with it.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the whole, for your raid team, 3% damage isn't really a make or break point, because I think what attracted a lot of people to AMR, especially during the reforging days, was that, you guys basically just took care of everything and basically provided the answer. What combination of reforges is going to get you as close as possible to the combination of stats you're looking for, or whatever, and then, like as now, prior to using AMR, what you guys offer currently, in order to figure out, what DPS you should be doing, what gear you should be selecting, all this stuff, you had to use a multitude of different systems. You could, go to your armory, pull your armory page off, go over to SimC, if you didn't have the in-game SimC add-on, run the sim, and then you could pull the pawn string off of that, put the pawn string back into game, and then that gives you an assessment value on gear that you either have in currently or drops in a raid, and it'll give you a stat value of this is a 6% upgrade or whatever, and then from there you can test that against, or double check that against ranked lists that different theorycraft guides have out there or whatever, to kind of make a decision. Whereas I think right now one of the things that attracts me so much to your guys' system currently is that you take care of every single step of that process. It's a one-stop shop. All of these little caveats we've talked about since last episode up till now, you guys are doing what I feel to be a damn good job covering those bases, and all this other stuff. And so kind of the point I want to address at this point in time, before we move on to the end part where we'll do some freeform questions that other people have submitted, or I've noticed in Discords or whatever, is I kind of want to just take a second and let you guys kind of give your sales pitch, so to speak, of why AMR versus using anything else out there. And not to say that anything else out there isn't good or doesn't have a place in the community, but I just, like I said, I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to kind of plug of why people should use AMR.
Yeah, and I would say if you do talk about your adaptive strategies and your global network and stuff like that, to kind of explain what those are, and even the blender, because all those are pretty new, right? And they're pretty good.
Right. Yeah. And so, right. So basically, I think why you should use AskMrRobot, I'm not biased at all, is, and I'm pretty sure every listener believes that, is we want to help you. Like, we're here to help you. Like, you'll notice that you'll see like the AskMrRobot name, but almost nobody knows who Zupercat, Yellow5, and Swol are, because we don't care. We're just here to help you. I don't care that anyone, nobody knows who I am. And so we're really trying to figure out ways to help everyone rank gear, which is what everyone really wants, and then get back into the game. And we want to make that as painless as possible. People usually aren't like, oh my God, I really want to sim. Simming is so much fun. Or I really want to make a spreadsheet to figure out my gear. Like most people don't say that. I might be one of the spreadsheet people because I'm a nerd and I like these things. But
I used to be.
Right.
I used to not like to sim, but now I do. I don't. Maybe it's those 1% upgrades that get me.
Yeah, and so we just really want to try to help you and solve these problems. And so we try to find like where people are stumbling, right? So before we used to have the stat weights and that would rank all the gear, but there's usually that big, well, while we try to do trinkets, we don't actually have simulation, we're not ranking with simulation data. We have this formula and blah, blah, blah. So there was always kind of this but. And so we really wanted to change that with this expansion. And so that's why we built a simulator among other reasons. And now all the trinket rankings are integrated into that. And then, so we did that with the start of Legion. And then what we're seeing is we're like, well, we have default stat weights. Well, I say stat weights. We have default stats plus trinket rankings and everything like all for you. But that's based on one character setup. And so people, would say, oh, well, I'm getting this result, but it doesn't sim as high as this other result. And I'm like, oh, well, that's because the gearing strategy you're using isn't actually custom to you. It's just our default, right? You have to customize it. And to customize it, you have to run a simulation to do that. And so we constantly were telling people, you have to sim a custom one. If you really want to min-max, you have to sim custom over and over and over again. And when this happens, we usually try to stop and think to ourselves, why are we making you do this? Like, can I sim for you, right? Can I solve this problem for you? Because people aren't saying, yay, I'm really excited to gear after I do this 2-hour simulation. And so that's how we ended up coming up with this adaptive strategy. And so once we explain that, hopefully you'll understand like why our system is just really next level. So I'm going to get this over to Yellow, who can talk about, how this works and how this came to be.
Right. Yeah. So the problem with stat weights that we've all talked about is not that they're inherently bad. It's just that they have a higher margin of error than we really want. And so what that really means is I can take my gear on my character, load it into the simulator, simulate it, and get an estimated average DPS to within what we think is 0.25% margin of error in a second or so. And that's great. But I have so many combinations of gear available to me as just in my own bags in my 2 raid nights a week. I probably have 1 billion combinations of gear, and 1 billion seconds is somewhere in the neighborhood of forever. But I still want that low margin of error. Like I want to use the simulator because the simulator I've always believed is the best theory crafting model of the game. I've always loved using simulation craft way back in the day. And I made my own simulator because I like simulation, and I wanted to add a whole bunch of features to it that SimC didn't have. Things like our own boss scripts. Like I like basing gear and simulation on actual boss fights. And I don't care about fighting patchwork anymore. That was what, vanilla? I don't know.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
So what I wanted to do is build a bridge between here's simulation data that says that we know is about as accurate as we can get it, and then here is the best set of gear in my bags. And the thing that had always been missing is that piece in the middle. Like, how do you get from a pile of simulation data to an actual gear ranking that runs in under 4 seconds? And so that's what these adaptive gearing strategies do. They're basically a giant statistical model that's based on simulation data. So we simulate, I don't even know how many, millions of combinations of gear for a given spec on a given fight. We use Goroth for our single target simulations and gearing strategies. And so I'll take, a couple million data points for balance druids on Goroth. And then what I do is then I run that through a whole bunch of statistical analysis to create this a predictive model is what I call it. And what the goal of the predictive model is, you feed into it any set of gear you want, and then it instantly spits out what it thinks that would have simulated to. And it's instant. You don't have to wait a second for a simulation to run. You have to wait a nanosecond for some numbers to add up inside a computer. And then that predictive model is used in the actual optimization engine. Because even if it's that fast, you still can't go through a trillion combinations of gear. That would take forever. If not forever, at least a couple minutes. And nobody wants to wait for a couple minutes while some server cranks. I want the answer right now. I want it in a second.
Yeah,
so the
people,
optimizer
they have no patience for that stuff.
Right. A couple minutes is essentially means your website doesn't work, dude.
Yeah, it's frozen.
So, then the optimizer is a combination optimizer, which uses well-known, computer techniques to search through trillions, quadrillions, even more combinations and very quickly. And so those three pieces work together to get you the ranking. So the adaptive strategy is, the best way to think of it is, it's a cloud of a ton of simulation data that can predict your DPS with any combination of talents, set bonuses, legendaries, stats, trinkets, relics. Doesn't matter. Any set of gear you put in, it spits out what it would simulate to. Now, obviously, the margin of error is higher than the actual simulator. If you want the same margin of error as the simulator, well, you got to use the simulator.
Yeah, and to put this in perspective, so you know how you've probably been told to sim your stat weights, and then when your gear changes, you have to sim it again, right? How many of you have heard that before? That you have to sim every time?
More times than I care to admit.
Right. And so that's where I think a lot of people were like, oh, I just don't want to do this. And so behind this whole adaptive strategy, like what Yellow's saying is, we're basically simming all this gear and all these talents that you might switch to in the future. And we're doing that upfront for you so that you never have to run stat weights again, because we've just done all the work for you. And the reason that hasn't been done before is the computing power that takes is giant. And so Yellow basically built, it's called a distributed network. And are any of you familiar with the project SETI at home? The thing that looks for aliens?
Yep, aliens.
Yes.
Yep.
So what it does, for those of you who don't know it, it uses, you tell it, hey, you can use my computer when I'm not using it, and then you can process sounds from outer space to see if any of them are patterns that might be real live aliens. And that's kind of cool. So Yellow built the same thing except for Warcraft gear instead of looking for aliens. And so we have a lot of people on that now, and then we have our own servers and stuff on that too. And so we're constantly cranking away at all of the sim your stat weights that you would have had to do. We've just done them for you before you need them. And so that's kind of how that works.
Do you have a certain a range of gears? So if it's below, let's say 840, you discount those now, or?
Yeah, in theory, it can rank any set of gear, but it definitely has higher accuracy the more, I don't know, we'll just call endgame relevant your gear is.
Okay.
So you can pretty much fall over on your keyboard and end up with 875 gear these days.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the lower end that we use right now is 875.
I'm clearly slacking. The DK is only 872.
Oh, no, but it will still rank a little lower than that, but it will rank as low as you want, really. The only limit is you have to have your artifact weapon, or else we kind of just throw up our hands and say, wrong expansion, dude.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, the margin of error just goes up the further you get like down into the lower item levels. It'll still give a perfectly good answer. You don't need really high accuracy if you have 850 gear, because a week later you're going to have 870 gear. If you go and do a few dungeons or whatever, or run around and do some world quests and stuff.
And I think you bring up a good point, because I think anybody in a situation where they might be wanting to potentially run sims at that low of an item level, you know, the way I handle all my alts, like Dan was saying, I'm gearing up a hunter right now because I'm more than likely going to switch to it in Argus. I don't even bother running sims or making gear selections or doing enchanting or doing that until my character's item level is close to, you know, the bottom tier of what would be acceptable in a current raid. Because like you said, you fall over or sneeze and you're going to shake up upgrades, you know, right now, the way the game is set up. So there's no point, because going back to what Zoop was saying, you know, do I really honestly want to sim and generate stat weights and do all this stuff every single time I get a piece of gear? Well, the answer is no. So I, you know, if anybody like last night after raid, to kind of give an off the cuff example, one of the raiders was just having a hard time figuring out why he was lacking, you know, I think it was somewhere around the ballpark of 100,000 DPS compared to other top parsers. And, you know, we started kind of shaking the tree, and I started walking through some Warcraft logs and doing some other stuff. And I kept telling him, I'm like, you might want to run some sims to test some of these theories. Like, this is what I think right now without diving too deep into things. And I suggested use your stuff, you know, but, again, this is, you know, it's, I guess I'm kind of losing myself here in this ramble, whatever. But, you know, when I would tell anybody, you know, what to do, my suggestion would be wait. You know, you don't need to really sim or look for upgrades until you get higher item level, because these things are, you know, it's like money growing on a tree right now with upgrades until you get up to the upper echelons.
So, to kind of go back to the adaptive, how does one do it on your site? Like, do they have to select it from a drop down, or
yeah, there's
is it always going to be adaptive now?
Yeah, so there's a big picker right next to your character name, and that's where you change the strategy that's being used to rank gear. We kind of just put everything in there now, and it'll say adaptive strategies if we have the adaptive strategies ready for your spec. And we don't have them ready for tanks and healers yet. That's high on my list. It's going to go in with 7.3 or shortly after, but definitely before the next raid starts. But yeah, it'll just say it right there. Otherwise, it'll say default, and it'll have a little message that says adaptive is coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, even from last week, I think it was last week, yeah, a lot of these specs weren't done, but it looks like most of them are done now. So yeah, I know I'm using it.
Yeah, there's a couple that I need to tweak, because, of course, Blizzard has to throw in really complicated items that make everything explode. But for the most part, they're looking really good.
How far do you look into the future? Do you pull up PTR and start testing stuff there?
Yes, we do. I mean, we have a PTR build, a simulator that's been on the site for a few weeks. That has all the Feral Druid stuff and the Frost Death Knight stuff. And yeah, this weekend we'll post up a new version with 7.3, and we'll have new gearing strategies for 7.3, the DPS specs, probably before Tuesday.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you guys are busy.
Yeah, that's the goal with this thing too, is it's taken a little longer because we're building the system. It's brand new, the first time we've done it, but the idea is now that we have the system built, we can just rattle them off whenever a game change comes out and have changes out there for everybody to use within a day or two of new content or class changes.
So when they ultimately add reforging back in next expansion?
Oh God, yeah.
Oh man, that's gonna be rough. But I mean, that's not happening, I don't think. Just trying to think of a curveball that's going to be
thrown. Could it make it even more complicated? Yeah, how about you put in something like, I don't know, Netherlight Crucible?
Yeah, right. That's true.
Oh, I didn't even think about that, but you bring a good point. Just to kind of, I guess, keep us moving forward here so we don't run out of time, I did have one more point I would like to briefly address before we move into the questions. Zoop, you and I were talking, and you've mentioned this a couple of different times now, and I'm not sure which of the three you would be best at to address this comment, but one of the points I have jotted down here for YMR is a lot of times when looking at other guides or advice from different theory crafters is they haven't necessarily always tested against their theories.
Right. And so I think Swol's probably going to be best for this because he writes a lot of the articles that look at these things. And yeah, so you and I were talking about just different assumptions of you'll see your rotation and somebody's like, well, you have to do this in your rotation. And so Swol's kind of the best person to address that. So I'll let you take care of that, Swol.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, people come up with ideas based on playing the game. They're like, oh, you got to do this. This makes a really big difference in your damage. But they haven't always tested the magnitude of that, or if it really did make that big a difference in your damage. I think the example I saw was something about marksmanship hunter and the 2-piece set bonus tier 20, and how you want to deal with casting the 2 aim shot in a row. Do you then follow that up right away with another aim shot, or do you want to pull some focus in between so you can cast in like groups of 2 aim shots? What really gets you the most damage? And you see people like say things like do this, do that, but okay, which one's better? And then not only which one's better, but how much better is it? So we do those, like when I'm making my rotations, I test that specifically. You have your regular rotation you do as a marksman hunter if you don't have tier 20. And then I put on tier 20 and I say, all right, here's how much damage you do if you just play the game like you've always been playing it. And now let's change the rotation. And let's get the maximum uptime on the 2-piece set bonus that we can by doing these groups of 2 aim shots. Does the damage go up? Does it go down? Does it stay the same? And it stays pretty much exactly the same. It doesn't go down, so you could do that and you wouldn't lose damage. Are you really gaining damage? Not really. So when people say, hey, you got to do this, you got to use these, these aim shots perfectly in a row. If you try to use 3 in a row, you're just gonna kill yourself. I don't know. That's some hyperbole there. It's just not that bad. I mean, a good player is gonna know I can't cast 3 aim shots in a row right now because I'm gonna have to move. So you're probably not gonna even try it. Yeah. But they talk about like, oh, if you focus cap for a second, that's gonna absolutely destroy your DPS. Well, not really. I mean, if you lose a little bit of focus, yeah, your DPS will go down compared to not, but it's not like this awful thing. I mean, getting targeted by random raid mechanic X 3 times in a row will kill your DPS way more than capping focus a little bit. So I think people tend to blow these things out of proportion. Simulators help us kind of bring everything back down to earth. And it really lets us test everything. You don't really have to take anybody's word for it. You can just test it. And you don't have to tell anybody they're wrong, or you don't have to tell anybody they're right. Just test it. See if it works. And that's that's the attitude that we take.
And I like that attitude, and that was one of the things. It's almost like you were present in the conversation I had with Zoop yesterday. Because that was one of the things that we discussed was the whole 2 versus 3 aim shots in the Hunter Discord. That's a question I posed, and I got an answer I wasn't too happy with. And Zoop, it's been shown that a couple different times now. It's been proven that some of these theory crafters have come up with an idea, tested that idea. Okay, it works. We're gonna run with it. But they never tested to see, okay, is there another rotation that does just as much or maybe more, or tested against another situation or whatever. There hasn't been any sort of ample testing to truly be able to say, yes, this is in fact the best option for you. And then you also have, other situations too that come at play where I really like the fact that you had just touched on this, Swol, where your stuff is transparent enough that you can verify what you're saying. If I use your thing, there's a way for me to verify what I'm being told is true. Whereas a lot of other times, if you jump over to a different guide, wherever, and you ask, okay, why is this true? Are you sure this is right? Like, sometimes you can't get the answers you need to verify that. And that's just not a good feeling. You know what I mean? It's a lot to ask somebody to blindly trust you. We all put time and effort
Well,
into this game, and sometimes it's like, yeah, you know what, I'm putting a hell of a lot of work into this. So excuse me if I want to verify what you're telling me is true.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. If you belong to that community long enough, maybe then you start getting in with them and they start giving you more data. But it's hard to just go to a Discord and post a question and then be friends with the theory crafter who's gonna tell you the answer, right?
And we could obviously go down this rabbit hole of a discussion, which Zoop and I have done a couple times now. But that's another time, another discussion. So at this point in time, I'd like to move over to just some freeform questions that I've jotted down here. I've pulled questions from people asking them. Like I said, we opened up the floor after last episode. We posted the episode the very next day to give ample time for people to weigh in with their questions. I pulled a couple of questions off of y'all's AMR Discord that people were asking you in Discord. And then also some other things that I've jotted down as we've kind of spoken. So at this point in time, I'm going to start off, and then Cole and Dan will jump in with any questions they have, and we'll kind of do a rapid fire freeform section here before we kind of take off for the evening. But the first thing I have jotted down here is what one of our guild members. When it's we're pretty open book with the fact that we do these shows. We do these the podcasts and stuff like that, and so it's been told. I advertised to our guild. I said, "Hey, we're doing this show with AMR. Do you guys have any questions you'd like us to ask them?" And one of the questions came from one of our healers. He isn't too happy with the fact that a lot of times trying to sim or get information for healers and tanks isn't as easy as it is with DPS. So the question I have written down is, what are you guys doing to make AMR more reliable for tanks and healers?
Oh, and should this be one for Swol or me? Because I do tanks and he does healers. Who wants it?
Well, you could answer each one because they're different.
Oh, I'll start. I'll do healers.
Okay.
How much time do I have? I'm just kidding. I could talk about healers forever. I love healing theory craft. Been doing it forever. I've made big spreadsheets for healers. So what are we doing to make simming more reliable for healers? Well, we're making simulation for healers, which previously just did not exist. There is nothing else out there to simulate healer with. Basically, the general consensus in the healing theory craft community is you can't sim healers. And instead of taking that as fact, I took it as a challenge. And so I went around. Well, we made a version of the healing simulator that I thought would be adequate for picking gear. Everybody hated it. They didn't like it. They didn't like the gear suggestions that came from it. I still argue they would have been fine, but whatever. It's not really, like I said, it's not really my place to tell people what they want. We're a business. People tell me what they want, and then I do it. So I went around and I kind of poked the theorycraft communities for healers. I said, well, okay, what's wrong with this? Why isn't this what you want? Why can't you sim healers? What would you need to sim a healer? And then I implemented all of those things in the version 2 of our healing simulator, which is pretty new. Version 2 came out with 7.2.5. And so now we really have legit healing simulation. I'm not going to go into all the details, but the things that it has which were missing is it simulates real raid damage events. It tracks the health of all the allies in the group. The quote rotation lets you play like a real player plays a healer. You don't really use a rotation as a healer. You react to the state of the raid. And the way you pick who to heal is by how much health they have. And you react to raid damage events, like you want to anticipate raid damage. And then you want to smartly pick the people to heal based on how much health they have. So we have all that built into the simulator. And so you can really simulate a real raid now, a real raid situation. There's people scripting fights. We're adding more defaults. We have a Mythic Plus, which is the Morose fight in Karazhan. We have a Croesus raid script. Almost done editing a mistress script that one of our users created. And then, oh yeah, I forgot. The other thing that we also simulate the other healers in your group, because that's the other.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
You can't simulate healers without simulating the other healers in your group. So we script the other healers are part of the boss script, and you can script them via. It's basically like a simple AI. They're not a full healer, but you can approximate them closely so that the simulation runs a bit faster. And you can you can modify the behavior of your other healers. You can say they're just as good as me, not as good as me, really aggressive, not aggressive. I have a holy paladin who just heals the tanks a ton, or I don't. You can do all of that in the simulator. I think a lot of people don't realize how far we've taken the healing simulation. And the Theorycraft community is not used to having a simulator to use for healing. And healing simulation is just way more complicated than DPS simulation. So my hope is that I can get some more people to drink the Kool-Aid and start using it. But the problem is they got to figure out how to use it. They don't have years of simulation experience. They don't know how to use it. It's going to take a while. But it's there now. The tool exists. The tool that we've always wanted now exists.
I'm going to have to give it a try, even though I've never really been a healer, just one expansion, but that's exciting. I'm just thinking of all the variables and all the possibilities that you put into it, and just thinking how you did it. I want to play with it.
Yeah, I'm always open to feedback. That's the other thing. I'm around all day, every day.
Are you able to adjust raid size and what that does to DPS healing, so forth?
Yeah, the raid script adjusts how many allies are in the raids and in what pattern they are standing.
Okay.
So there's not like a real nice user-friendly setting like on the sim setup page, but you can edit the script. You can like copy the script and make your own version and change the number of people in it to be like your raid, and then save it and use your custom one.
Yeah, I would definitely make the AIs in my raid way better than I am. I would be the worst one, just to test it.
Yeah, I have them set up to be pretty aggressive. They're going to heal up. Everyone's going to heal about the same amount, which is really what you're going for in a raid.
Yeah. Man, dots, everything. Man, that's okay. I got to try this.
Well, and then, and you obviously take into account, too, your DPSers and your tanks, their personal cooldowns, lock rocks, health potions, whatever, or classes that have self-healing abilities. Well, those come into play too. Over a 2-minute fight, they might be marginal, but over a 5-minute fight or like a KJ, like some of those heals add up to quite a bit of healing.
Could a blood DK become a healer at that point?
So I script in the default scripts, I script the tank as an extra healer who heals himself. But I don't do like Hellstones and Vampiric Embrace and like stuff like that. Even though it would make a difference on a really tight fight. Yeah, you kind of got to draw the line somewhere.
Right. Yeah, you would go way deep.
I would argue that those effects aren't really going to affect how a healer gears, but the tank does affect how a healer would gear.
Yeah, I would figure if I use a Hellstone, the healer, either I'm real low and the healer already knows I'm low, they're going to heal me up, and that Hellstone is just kind of to save me from death. I don't know if it's from a healer's perspective they care if you use a Hellstone to a certain degree. I mean, they probably do, but not as much as their heal.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. That's a hard situation.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think if we went down the rabbit hole any further, our heads would pop off.
Well, and it's like you said, you have to draw the line somewhere.
Do you also do, I guess, mechanics that would target somebody? Do they target the healer as well, or do they target just DPS? Is that a thing in your? Is that just a boss script? I guess.
Yeah, the boss script has complete control over who gets targeted.
Okay. So, all right, that answers my question.
So maybe at this point in time, we can let Yellow talk about the tanking stuff.
Yeah, I'll keep it real short because it's kind of the same story as healing. You can sim tanks now. There had always been, not always. You guys remember Thek? Are you familiar with that theory crafter?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so I really liked his theory craft. He's quit the game before Legion started. He was a big mathematician, so it was all very math-based. And he put in a sort of simulator. He built it into simulation craft for tanks. It would calculate his custom metric that he made called TMI. And I liked it. We based our gear rankings on AMR, on his work, and TMI in particular for most of the last expansion or two. But it was never a full tank simulator. It was very specific to calculating his metric. It doesn't really model real health pools. You essentially have infinite health in the TMI simulator. It didn't simulate real raid events. It went off a script that literally just did melee attacks on the boss and then used like some sort of damage over time ability every 10 seconds or something like that. It didn't simulate getting healed by anybody else. It was just what you could do to yourself. So it's a very artificial situation meant to calculate a metric. And it was a clever metric. It was designed really well. But I got to thinking to myself, if I could simulate an actual fight and everything that happens for a tank, wouldn't that be better? And wouldn't I be able to get some more interesting information for tanks? So I said, yeah, let's just do it. So I did it. And for tanks, we have a lot of the same stuff that Swol was saying about the healers. You can script how you're getting healed by your healing team, how many healers you have, how aggressive they are. You can script everything about how the boss attacks you. Our boss scripts are almost spot on to the logs of how you'd be getting attacked. The first one we made was Ursoc. And if you compare the log in our simulator of what Ursoc is doing to you to an actual combat log of what Ursoc is doing to you, it matches to the second. And that's what I really wanted as a tank for Theorycraft. And you can write, your rotation. Tanks are sort of a hybrid, right? You do have a rotation as a tank because you're doing kind of a damage rotation or you need to generate a resource, but you're also reacting to the state of the simulation. So we put in all the cues that you need to react to big damage events that are coming in and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, now you can simulate an actual fight. And the main reason I wanted a tank simulator is I wanted to be able to, I didn't want to base our gearing advice anymore on some metric like total damage taken or TMI or healing received per second or healing required per second or something like that, because all of them have problems. They don't quite tell the whole story. I wanted to base it on something what actually mattered. If you just boil all that away as a tank, you care about not dying. And so I wanted something that could tell me, am I going to die or not? And what's the chance that I'm going to die? And that's where we're at with simulation for tanks. And we base all of our toughness advice around these simulations that predict the likelihood that you'll get killed in a given real boss situation. And, the other piece that we added is the blender. That's a very recent addition, just the last few weeks. And what that does is, at some point you're not going to die. Your death chance is literally 0 if you get tough enough. And if your death chance is 0, how do you pick gear anymore? If you get more stamina, it just doesn't matter. You don't care anymore. There is sort of this weird sweet spot for tanks where you really do need to get tougher to more reliably beat the fight. But once you're there, all gear ranks the same, and you're kind of just making it up at that point. So we put the blender in to smoothly transition you into DPS gear once you reach that toughness threshold where you're not going to die. You're not going to scare the shit out of your healers every time you step into a raid. So then you're like, yeah, all right, now I want to start mixing in DPS gear. So maybe I can take off my tank trinket and put on a DPS trinket. Maybe I can put on my weaker set bonus that has better damage synergy. Maybe I can, start, replacing some of my versatility with critical strike, that sort of thing. And that's where we're at with tank simulation. That's how we're pushing tanking forward.
Well, I thank you greatly for that. I remember back in the day, I think it was even last expansion, trying to do stat weights where the proper way to do it was run the sim for healing, run the sim for your TMI, run your sim for DPS, and then mentally finding an average between those stat weights to get your actual stat weights, which was the biggest time-consuming pain in the ass in the world.
Yeah, it's so hard to do it.
Yeah, because it just boggled my mind, and I think it stressed me the hell out with it. My one question is, does the simulator account for your use of cooldowns?
Yes.
Because I know that Tank A, Tank B, two different situations. Best one I have is the Kill Jaden fight, where I missed last Tuesday, and we had a DK fill in for me. And he struggles with the auto attacks on Kill Jaden, where I can just sit there pretty much with no mitigation up whatsoever for auto attacks. And I struggle with Fell Claws, yet he breezes his way through it. So I was just kind of curious how that works.
Yeah, so you can script it and play around with whatever scenario you want, really. We allow you to. I don't have a Kill Jaden script specifically, but we have other bosses with a similar idea, right? You know that, hey, this big damage event is coming up in a couple of seconds, so you can time up. You can tell your script, if Fell Claws is going to happen in a second, use this defensive ability, or if I have 3 stacks of Fell Claws, now pop this ability. You can do all that kind of stuff in the simulator and use all of your defensive cooldowns, and it's been kind of interesting too, because I've played around with it. I play a paladin, and paladins have a lot more cooldowns to press, I feel, than some of the other tanks. So it's kind of interesting deciding what's really the best way to do this. I think tanks just in general tend to hold on to their stuff pretty long. They tend to save all their stuff for when something bad happens. So they get smacked and then they use their cooldown. And it's really not how you want to be tanking. You want to anticipate your damage, and you want to spread your cooldowns out and use them all the time. It's one of those interesting things that starts to fall out when you simulate tanks. It's not so much saving yourself when you get smacked, it's preventing getting there in the first place.
I completely agree with that. Once again, on Kill Jaden, there's several times with Fell Claws where all I need is Iron Skin Brew, and I make it through. And we had way too many wipes on it, but by the end of it, I was comfortably finding a rotation with my cooldowns where it was, I know I'm going to use Fort here, I'm going to use Dampen Harm there, and it was just methodical at that point by the time we killed him last night.
Yeah, a great example is one of the guys in our Discord. He tanks on his Blood TK a lot, and he wanted to solo all of the hammers on Mythic Maiden. And so he said, all right, I'm going to script this, and I'm going to figure out like what cooldowns I need to use in what order, and how much stamina do I need to get on my gear to make this happen. And he did it. Like, he made this simulation, and he made a script, and he's like, 100% chance to die. That's no good. So then he just kept playing with it until he's like, all right, 10% chance to die. I'm going to go do this. And then he said it went great.
That's pretty cool. I think it's cool that you have the tools that you can allow players to do that. That's what I like.
And I think this is just another point of, whereas other systems you would have to use a combination of things, or find other avenues to fit your needs or wants. They're offering everything under one roof, so to speak. So I think this is why I think AMR is so attractive. I had a couple of things jotted down that are more like, the FAQ type things. And the first one I actually copy pasted it from somebody else in your Discord. And the question reads, so I'm trying to make use of AMR to see the difference between what I do and what AMR thinks I should be doing. I ran the logs off of my Goroth fight, and AMR thinks I should be doing about 250k more DPS than I did. Is there a way to find the key differences?
Yeah, so I can start this one, and then I think I'll throw it over to Swol. So one of the other things we did with our simulator is we let you import a public log from Warcraft logs into our simulator. And so what that does is it copies the gear and talents that you had at that time, as well as the fight length. And then you still have to manually pick your potions and stuff in our simulator. But so when you get that set up, then you can simulate the DPS, kind of like he's saying, right? So the simulator says I do 250k more DPS than I did in the log. And so from there, you can start to do some interesting things. The first things you might look for are, did you get targeted with an ability that made you run around more than average? To try to figure out if there's a couple of differences from there. Now you can change the boss script to do that, or you can just eyeball it and say, yeah, that's probably about 10,000 DPS. After that point, and this is where I'll hand it over to Swol, because he does a lot of this stuff too, is, looking at comparing ability uses. And so Swol, do you kind of want to walk through what you do when you help people?
Sure. To answer the person's question directly, do we have an automated tool that compares a real log to a simulator log? No, but that would be awesome. Maybe someday. For now, you kind of got to do it yourself. Like Zoop said, you set up the simulation, you put it next to your Warcraft log, and you just look at them. First off, they both show you pretty much the same bar chart for your damage. Do they look the same? And you can start from there, and then the biggest thing to look at is the number of abilities that you used, and then the number of abilities that the simulator used. If there's a big difference, then that's where that's where most people see the DPS loss. It's not usually because they're not lining up their cooldowns right, or they have a completely wrong rotation. It's usually because they just didn't use enough abilities. Anybody who's ever been a raid leader knows that the people with the highest activity time in the fights are the ones who do the most damage. Even without a perfect rotation, it's the people who figure out how to move the least, use their defensive cooldowns to avoid mechanics, that kind of thing. And so I generally tell people, look at the ability uses, and then you got to kind of know your spec from there. A good example would be a Havoc Demon Hunter. It's oh, well, the simulator used 10 more Chaos Strikes than I did, and you're using the Demon Blades talent. Well, that's a flat proc chance. So if you just got an unlucky parse, and you can look in your log and say, all right, well, I got I auto-attack the boss 100 times. That's the same as the sim, but I got 60 Demon Blade procs instead of 70. So that's less Fury, that's less Chaos Strikes, and it's kind of a cascading effect from there. So you got to kind of know your spec a little bit to really figure it out. But you can always ask us in our Discord, and we can show you how to compare a sim log to your actual combat log.
Yeah, and there's also, movement. Swol mentioned moving. That causes people to lose spell casts, which can really affect your DPS. And so when I make the boss scripts, well, the default boss script has you playing, very, very well. I'll make other ones that make you move a little bit more, so that you're not moving perfectly. Like for Goroth, ranged shouldn't have to ever lose DPS when they hide behind the pillar, because you can kind of, step to your right or your left a couple steps at a time while you're waiting for your global cooldown. And you kind of inch your way over because that's a predictable event. You know what's going to happen. There's a countdown. You know when it's going to happen. You can pre-position. But for people who aren't pre-positioning and run around, with their heads cut off, like I happen to do healing a lot, you're going to lose those casts. And so I make different boss scripts that let, kind of assume you're moving extra, you're freaking out a little bit, and you can kind of see, you can sim with the default and say, oh, I should be doing 1,000,000 DPS. And then you sim with the one that's moving and it says you should do 950. You're like, wow. Okay, so if I just focus on this movement thing alone, I'm going to gain 50,000 DPS. And you can kind of see like where that lines up compared to your log and based on how you play.
And I'm actually glad you brought that up with that fight, because after last week's show, when you had mentioned, if the boss is near the pillar, melee get a bit better benefit from it. We tried it in our raid, and it was amazing.
Nice.
97% pars. It was awesome. So yeah, movement is definitely, and pre-positioning and all of that is one of the things that helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting a little long on time here. I definitely had one more question. We've actually been pretty successful at addressing a lot of the questions I have jotted down from other people or ourselves throughout this show. One of the last ones I wanted to address was, and we've talked about this off the air a couple of times now, but the question reads, how can I use AMR to help me figure out what upgrades are out there for me ahead of time so that I don't waste time in raids?
Yeah, who wants to take the upgrade finder question?
You? Yes, I could because I wrote it.
Sure.
The upgrade finder.
The end.
See you later.
Wait, are we in Discord? Are we just
Send it.
Just upgrade finder, dude. But yeah, it's a tool that we made that it does pretty much exactly what you want as a raider. I use it every time before I raid. I go to it, and firstly on our site there's a filter button right up in the top middle. Looks like a funnel. You click on it, and you can put in all sorts of filters. Like, for example, our team is never going to do mythic Tomb of Sargeras. Sorry, man, we're just not going to get there. So I can just turn off mythic Tomb of Sargeras gear. And so then that's not cluttering up my gear recommendations. And you can go down to the individual boss level. Like if there's one boss your team just can't beat, just skip it. And so you set up all your filters. So you're like, all right, here's the content I can actually do. My team is going to actually get to. And then you save it, and then you go to the upgrade finder and you just press find upgrades. And behind the scenes, it's going to rank everything from everywhere that you've said, I want to look at gear from. It'll do 5-man's crafted gear, raids, whatever, world bosses. And it just throws them all into a big ranked list. And then it lets you filter through them. So you could say, how should I spend my bonus rolls? That's the one I use the most. So I pick bonus rolls, and it'll kind of group up the loot by boss. And then I can say, all right, well, this boss is my number one candidate for rolling because given the quality of the upgrades and the quantity of the upgrades, I just have the highest likelihood of getting the best bang for my buck. The most use out of my token on that boss. And a lot of people don't realize that you can actually expand the bosses when you do that. There's these icons that kind of show you what gear you can get, but you can look at the individual rankings and stuff. There's also a text filter on it, so you can type in any filter you want. You can just go to all items. It'll list out hundreds of items, and you just start typing. Like if I only want to look at items that have crit and haste on them, just type crit, haste, and then it gives you a ranked list of every item with crit and haste on it.
Or tier. I like typing.
Yeah, you can type in
T20.
Show you all your tier 20 items. Type in crafted, type in name of a boss, the name of a zone, the name of whatever. You can just do that, get a list before you even go into the raid, so you know exactly what you're looking at.
It's cool.
That's nice.
Yeah, I guess there's one other thing Zoop reminded me of. There's the whole, like for this expansion for Legion, we've had the upgrade finder for years. The challenge with this expansion is, well, what if it's Warforged? Or what if it randomly ends up with a socket on it or something like that? How do I know what boss to spend my bonus rolls on? Well, so we put in this mode that will keep upgrading an item until it is good for you. And we set the threshold at, take my current item, add 5 item levels to it. If it's not at least that much better than my current item, keep improving it until it is. That's our sort of threshold for considering something an upgrade.
So let me ask you this. I kind of like to play out a real example here, just so people have a little bit better understanding. So let's say I'm in the raid on my hunter, and a male belt drops, and I currently don't have the male legendary or whatever, and I'm not quite sure if that is an upgrade for me. I, like you, had already, pulled up AMR before I started my raid. Can I go in there and just filter only male belts and see where that falls in the list of upgrades to see if it truly is an upgrade for me or not?
Yeah, you can type in the name of the item. You could type in just male or just belt, and yeah, it'll filter it for you.
You don't really need to type in male since it'll only show you male for a hunter.
True.
Redundancy is key. Well, and I like this because I typed in belt and it's showing me all the slots listed as waist. So you guys have built in, synonyms.
Or is it?
Did I?
Or is it catching belt in the name of every item? How smart were you?
I'm going to ignore that because that is actually what is happening now that you say that. But I'm going to keep believing that it's waist.
Maybe that should go on the feature list.
I'm going to edit this out so I sound like a genius.
So yeah, let's revise that. It's a smart-ish search.
Well, and that's the beauty. You guys are going. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we're talking about the upgrade finder, and I know we talked about best in bags. We've kind of mentioned that. And just so everybody listening knows, upgrade finder and best in bags are part of our premium, which is $12 a year, which is, we try to keep the price nice and low so that everyone can use it. And you're already paying, $15 a month to Blizzard to play the game. And so we think that's a nice, fair price. So you get all of our premium features right now for that price. And then the simulator and all the simulation things we're talking about and the adaptive strategies, all that work we put into that, all of that's free, 100% free. And so you never have to pay for it. You never wait in a queue. We never limit you. You can, if you wanted to run those simulations, remember in the very beginning, we talked about legendaries and we got up to like 9,000 combos and you wanted to run that for 2.5 days, you can. So all of that is free, just so everybody knows that the simulator and the adaptive strategies you never have to pay for.
That's cool. Well, I know that Swol, I think he needs to take off very, very soon, and I think we've done a pretty good job. Can
I make a note?
Go ahead.
When you're using the best in bags and you set up sets, make sure you hit the save button because I just screwed everything up on my account tonight.
Oh, no.
Yeah, hit save and update after you tweak stuff.
Right.
So I have actually a question about this upgrade finder. Legos. So if I have a finger 1 Lego, is it going to show an upgrade for finger 2 with that same Lego?
Yeah. So yeah, you just had to hit on the biggest weakness of the upgrade finder.
Oh, my bad.
No, I'm just kidding. Legendaries are very difficult to. So when we show legendaries in the upgrade finder, take it as a very rough estimate.
Okay.
To really tell if a legendary is an upgrade, you need to run it through best in bags because you need to try all the permutations with all your other gear. But the upgrade finder can give you like a rough estimate. It will try to take a guess at, if I got this legendary and took off one of my other legendaries and replaced it with a decent item, would it be good? But it is definitely not as thorough as best in bags, which will actually take every item you own and try every combination of stuff. So that's what you want to do with legendaries.
Okay.
So I meant to wrap us up, but I'm looking at one thing now, and I changed my mistake of belt to waist, and it's set to marksmanship hunter, and it's showing the BM belt as being the highest ranked legendary belt, and it's like, and then the second one is the multi-shot one, which is, you want that for AoE. And then here's it looks like the survival one is the third best one. When the ranks are being calculated for these items, are they being calculated based on a single target fight, a cleave fight, all of the above? How do the rankings get derived?
Yeah, it's whatever strategy is showing up in the picker at the top.
So the single target.
If you have single target chosen, it's going to be ranking it all based on single target data. If you have multi-target, it'll base it all based on multi-target data.
Super cool.
Yeah, but yeah, like I said, I don't know. I have to think a little more about legendaries in the upgrade finder. At one point, I was thinking about removing them from the upgrade finder because people were getting a little confused about the accuracy of that particular recommendation. I tend to think about legendaries more as, since you can't really control which legendaries you're getting, they're not the sort of thing you need to plan so much for. It's kind of like, oh, I just got a legendary. Let's see if it's good. Or you can run best in slot, which will find, pie in the sky sets of gear that contain legendaries, and that will do a pretty exhaustive examination of legendary combinations also.
Yeah, I like that. On some of these, I have almost 0% chance of getting them. That makes me sad. But then again, I'm looking at them, I'm like, do I want that item? But then you see number 1 and it's real high drop chance, so I'm going to be looking out for that one.
That's cool. Well, we only have a few minutes left before somebody has to take off. And again, we could continue to sit here all night long and ask these questions and nerd out.
Sure, yeah.
And yeah, be total geeks. And I'm sure a lot of you guys would be willing to listen or want to be active participants. But I think our end goal of what we wanted to achieve with this show, of giving you all listeners a better understanding, has been achieved. And if not, by all means, feel free to message in your questions or suggestions or whatever, and we'll definitely talk about how you can do that here in a second. But I wanted to give a big thanks to the 3 that joined us today, Swol, Zoop, and Yellow, because often at times whenever you try to reach out to people who are doing the work for theory crafting or simulators, stuff like that, they either A, don't have the time, B, don't want to spend the time, or C, are just for whatever reason are being competitive enough that they don't want to release this information for various reasons. And it's not a good feeling. It's not somebody I want to put trust and faith in from a community perspective when they're in a position of being, I guess, authoritative or, in a role of advisement. Because again, you're not in a raid by yourself. So why would you, want to depend on any one single person? This is a collective community. And I think the work that these 3 are doing over there, and the fact that they are so transparent and are continually doing work to update this and try to account for every single possible variable that could be at play, whereas other people or groups that are doing some of the similar work don't necessarily want to tackle some of these hurdles because they're big hurdles to overcome. So I and the fact that they were willing to take the time when they could, be sitting there and doing work to continue to benefit the rest of you out there in the community, I think speaks volumes to the fact that they do want to be helpful and they want to give a good product out to everybody. So I wanted to say a big thank you to the 3 of you. This has been awesome. And yeah, so.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We love talking to people about theorycraft, so bring it on.
Yeah, cool, awesome.
Yes, thank you very much. This was awesome. I love these episodes.
We before we take off, I wanted to kind of give you guys an opportunity to plug where people can find you, ask questions, that kind of stuff. Where they can click the buy button for premium to help you out. Keep funding the work you're doing.
Yeah. Basically, if you just use the site, if you haven't started a free trial yet, everyone gets a free trial because we think it's important that you get to try everything before you buy it. And we never ask for a credit card during the free trial because we all know sites that do that, and it's annoying because they're just trying to trick you. So you'll never find that on our website. You get a really, truly free trial. And then after that, if you just upgrade, We have like a third-party credit card system that's secure because we're smart enough to know we should never handle credit cards. Bad things happen, leave it to the experts. And PayPal as well. And yeah, it's $12 a year, and you can sign up. You can leave it, and it'll sign you up again next year, or you can cancel right away, and you get to keep your remaining time. We just want to run like, an honest upfront business as we'd like to be treated. And so we want you to have like, the payment options and, easy ways to manage your account. And so, yeah, it's $12 a year, and it keeps this going so we can keep providing really cool features and, make sure that we keep the site well funded enough that we can keep all these things free. Like we really enjoy making sure the simulator is out there for everybody, and these adaptive strategies are out there for everybody. That's important to us. And so with the global network, anyone who joins the global network helps keep those costs in line and stuff. So yeah, we would love the support. We have fun building this.
And they can find you over at your Discord, which I'll link in the show notes. Is there any other way they can get a hold of you guys if they want to ask questions?
Yeah, a great place to ask us questions is on our forum, which is linked on the main website. It's just forums.askmrrobot.com. Forums and Discord are great ways to reach us, and never hesitate to give us a suggestion, point out a weird gear ranking. That I always hate it when people say, I got this weird gear ranking, and then I don't hear about it for like 2 months. Just tell me right away, and we'll look at everything.
Yeah, and you don't have to feel bad about like questioning anything. Like if you're like, why is this happening? This seems really strange. We're open, we're transparent. We want to hear these things. 9 times out of 10, it's just, we have to help you set something up differently. 1 time out of 10, yeah, something's wrong, and we need that case to figure it out and fix it. And so it's really helpful.
And then you guys also have your Twitter account, which is AskMrRobot, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Cool. And I'll make sure I get all this stuff linked in the show notes, guys, so you guys can find that. And then there's a couple articles that I really found helpful when I was spending time with these three, kind of trying to get an understanding of what's going on here so that I could help better direct the show and create some good content for you listeners. And I'll definitely link those two. One of them talks about the differences between the suggested the Ret Paladin rotation versus the rotation the AMR group came up with. And there was times where the simpler rotation the AMR came up with was better, stuff like that. It's a really good read. I think it really sheds some light on the fact that what we have known for so long now are believed to be true for so long now often isn't always the case. And so the whole fact of, we as a community and players should try to be a bit more open-minded, I think is a good thing. And I'll definitely link those. There's another, I think was a Resto Druid one or a Druid one, I think was.
Oh, Feral Druid.
Feral Druid. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's some really good art. I'll link those too. But as for us, Dan, why don't you kind of let people know where they can find you?
Well, they can find me at JacksonGad1125, both on Twitter and Twitch, in which, if you actually do watch, you can see the way that their new Best in Bags is changing my life, whether better or for worse, because I'm going to give it a try.
If it's for worse, just let me know. So I can fix it.
I'm not gonna say it's your fault. It could be the play style that I use. So right, I'm willing enough to take that accountable as well.
Make sure you change your talents if you have them different in the game, because I was simming with like the wrong talents this entire time. I'm like, why is my DPS so low? But yeah, I found that out.
Right on. For us here at the show, guys, if you have any questions for the TRC crew, or if you want to make any suggestions for future content that you want us to cover, or say hello, give us some praise, feedback, any of that kind of stuff, you can find us on our Twitter account, which is @_TRC podcast, or you can email us at theraidersconfessional@gmail.com. There is no apostrophe on the S. And as for myself, you can find me over on the other show I do with a good friend Dusty Porter called Blizzard Umbrella, where we talk all of Blizzard's games, or you can find me on my Twitch or Twitter account, which is @McIrishGaming. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for us. It's another show, the end of our 2-part series, the AMR crew. And again, can't thank them enough. But now, as for me, Cole, Dan, Swol, Swoop, and Yellow, we will talk to you later. See you guys.
Bye. Happy raiding.
See ya.
Later.
Thank you.